Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Dr. Alan Singer is again with us because this is like a continuation of the previous show because we're trying to do an end of year wrap of some of the issues and stories we've discussed in the past. And because we're in the back end of the year, this will air the Monday after Christmas. And so I hope everyone is still enjoying a happy Christmas season. Hope they're working well with Kwanzaa as it's progressing when this airs. I know some of my friends already celebrated Hanukkah. And so thanks to the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and Manhattan Neighborhood Network, this Media Watch episode is being brought to you. We need to bring some quick updates. Last show we talked about the young lady in Chicago, and we were wondering why it was taking the city of Chicago so long to bring justice to her case. The recap being she was naked in her own home and was totally, what's the right phrase?
Humiliated.
Basically the police came in, they barged in what, how many were in the room?
10? More than three, more than two, let's put it that way.
Yeah, they barged in while she was either getting in or getting out the shower. She's naked, and they handcuffed her naked and proceeded to ask all sorts of questions. And during the whole time she's screaming, you got the wrong place. You got the wrong place.
The wrong house and the wrong person, and they refused to listen. For over 10, 12 minutes, it took one female officer to say, look, and she had the smarts and the presence of mind to take her into another location so she could. The woman filed suit against the City of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, and they dragged their feet on it for the longest time. But we can update it, folks, by telling you we got word that they finally decided to settle that suit to the tune of $2.9 million to try to do justice to the fact that she's still suffering from PTSD, can't hold a job, has been totally traumatized, and who knows, hopefully she's got good financial advisors and this will last her through the rest of her life where she won't have to worry about holding down a job. But that was one positive outcome. Bob, you had some takes on the mayor of Chicago. You want to tag this with any editorial comments?
Yes, not to extend the discussion, but I'm glad that she got the $2.9 million settlement out of the city. And like I said to you and Alan earlier, I'm terribly disappointed in Mayor Lori Lightfoot because I feel this should have resonated with her from day one. And she should have made an attempt to get this settled and done with. But instead, like you said, Eric, she came out with this public relations style comment, which did nothing for anybody. So in that respect, she, I expected more of her, especially in a case like this.
Yeah, I second that. And then the second quick update, we talked about a young man that was arrested by some Alabama Sheriff's Department. And Alan, I think you up on the gentleman, I think he used to play for the New Orleans Saints or one of those teams in the South.
His name is Glen Foster, and he was a defensive end for the New Orleans Saints.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these football players suffer tremendous head injuries and brain damage. He should have been treated as someone who was having difficulties, and he was not. And then he was found dead in police custody.
He was found dead 2 days after he was arrested. They actually realized that he was suffering some mental health issues. I believe the last report was the sheriff called his family and said, please come get him, take him to a hospital so that we can have him evaluated because we can tell that there's a problem here. By the time the family got to the hospital, there were other emergency vehicles coming to the hospital, not to the jail. Emergency vehicles were at the jail. the sheriff's office sent Foster to the hospital in the emergency vehicles. And by the time he got to the hospital emergency room, he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The question is, was he dead? Did he die on the way? Was he already dead in the jail? Ben Crump, the latest civil rights attorney who tends to be on all these high profile cases, definitely has looked into this. I probably may have been instrumental in getting the independent autopsy. The result of the independent autopsy is that there seemed to be some sort of choking or strangulations that may have well played a role in the death of Mr. Foster. And Crump's very concise statement is the sheriff's office owes this family a lot more information and explanation over why 2 days after he was arrested on a mental health issue problem, he ended up dead with seemingly strangulation or choking issues involved in his death.
And just to be specific, we're talking about the Pickens County Sheriff in Alabama.
In Alabama, excellent. Glad you pinned it down. No point blackballing, whitewashing the entire Alabama judicial system. Let's name the specific sheriff's office. And those are our two quick updates so that we're trying to keep you abreast of stories that we feel needs to be high on the radar.
Eric, but we should comment on also policing in New York City just briefly.
Sure.
Because Mayor-elect Eric Adams, who takes office on January 1st, selected a female police officer who had been in charge of Nassau County, and she will now be the New York City Police Commissioner. Now, Adams has committed himself to policing the right way. Now, Adams was a longtime police officer.
Yeah, he's a captain, former captain in the NYPD.
But again, Adams knew when he was in the ranks that there was a lot of deeply embedded racism there. And I think he's making some of the right moves, but I'm not sure. After what we learned about how police responded to the Black Lives Matter movement, how New York City is going to police in the right way.
That's a good point, Alan. And Bob and I had a discussion on this a couple of days ago. The three major police departments, LA, Chicago, and New York, are all notoriously bad, historically so, and even today in dealing with the general population and specifically with populations, people of color. And so the fact that the current newly elected mayor of New York happens to be a former police captain who was himself done disservice by the NYPD, which is why he became a police officer to begin with, leads us to have some high degree of hope that he's going to keep a sharp eye on whomever he puts in to run that police department and how they're progressing. That's the only way I can think positively about the moves he's making and what his incentives are. And let's keep our fingers crossed. Like we said, when we talked about this before, we are going to keep a sharp eye on this.
And Eric, I guess my question is how the rank and file will react to her, because she was in charge of the detectives in Nassau County. And with a in charge of fewer people, not as big, as gigantic a force, obviously, as in New York. So we'll see how that happens. See how the PBA and the rest.
And I suspect he was influenced by the fact that she was in charge of detectives and had a big role to play in their undercover work in the Nassau County Police Department. And so when he says he wants to reinstitute undercover forces the right way, that could have been one of the reasons why he selected her. So like I said, we'll see. We'll keep a sharp eye on that. Actually, quick like, I saw a report that the LAPD had hired some, I want to say Eastern European, but I'm not sure, it could have been Israeli data gathering organizations to crunch data on phrases like Black Lives Matter, police, defund the police, et cetera, in the height of the protests during the George Floyd's murder, summer of protests, the social justice, criminal justice reckoning period, they actually hired a firm to start, quote, surveilling and digging into anybody who was searching for, Googling, et cetera, et cetera. Seriously, I don't want to say illegal, but if it wasn't illegal, should have been illegal. They did not put a contract out with these people, even though the people gave them free use of their data crunching services, et cetera. But I would say somebody in the LA area and the Justice Department need to be looking into whether the LAPD is violating people's constitutional rights using data crunching, investigative surveillance organizations on the citizens of Los Angeles. So much for those three big city police departments. That's the latest update that I came across just this week. And we're taping the Wednesday before our Monday air, folks. So, but anyway, the key stories that we need to actually dig into, we'll just jump into. And the January 6th insurrection anniversary is popping up in a couple of weeks, not that far away. And the Trump supporters who tried to overthrow the election, who are actually in the House of Representatives, and a large number of them voted to overthrow the election, folks. Don't forget that. There are a few key members that the investigative body, what's that select committee called? January 6th Commission in the House that's investigating the January 6th insurrection. They have subpoenas the Pennsylvania Republican representative by the name of Perry. And Perry says
Scott Perry, was it?
He's not going to respond to the subpoena because he thinks they're an illegal body. And so now they're faced with whether or not they're going to have the Justice Department haul them in by issuing a contempt of Congress citation.
I think what they're trying to do here is stall until the 2022 election. Republicans are figuring that they're going to be able to take the House and end all these investigations prior to the 2024 election. One of their strategies is they are gerrymandering congressional districts as fast as they can, because they're figuring however people vote, if they can shift around the districts, they can take the House and end the investigations.
Correct.
And I think that's their strategy, to stall until they can seize control of the House of Representatives.
I think you're correct.
I'm so glad you said that, Alan, because Eric and I were having exactly this conversation last week. We were talking about the gerrymandering. I think there's one case where the growth in the state was mainly Latino, and they managed to draw districts that didn't have any Latino majorities in it. So, I mean, terribly gerrymandered. And exactly what you said, Alan, that's what I said to Eric. They're trying to run out the clock and you know, delay so that they have a chance to sweep this under the rug. So
that is correct.
Two good points.
Yeah, and the key thing for me, because the next thing we're going to talk about in this January 6th is the op-ed piece that the Washington Post ran by 3 major generals from the military. But one of the key things that seems quite obvious is the fact that these Republicans are trying not just to gerrymander the districts so that it doesn't matter whether you pass a national voting law, that their local elections are going to take precedence so that they will end up controlling the outcome of the election by gerrymandering the district. When that doesn't work, they're also trying to pass these local laws wherein they can overturn an election by putting their people in control, like Secretary of State, Attorney General, whoever controls the election body, the infrastructure of how those elections are run statewide, from state county to the city, they can then, by fiat, overturn the outcome of those elections. And so we are going to be faced with a problem that if the election is actually won by somebody who is not of their liking, they're going to try their best to throw it out and overturn it, which then becomes cause for people to be going into the streets and fomenting their own insurrection because the laws have been, the will of the people have been circumvented. And so the problem that we have is, if that happens, where do we turn? Usually we say, okay, we follow the Constitution, but there are all these rules about the Electoral College. What do you do when this is tied and when this is not tied? How does it get thrown back to the House? And my fear is it's going to get to the point where somebody's going to end up saying, well, this is total chaos and we need to declare martial law, which is exactly what they tried to do with Trump's rolling coup in plain sight. Where, what was the PowerPoint that they put out? Where you can do this, call this and say that, and then we can declare martial law and you can put in the military. Well, last time the military decided, no, that's not for us. That's for you civilian people to deal with. But the op-ed piece that these three generals wrote in the Washington Post said that may turn out to be problematical if we don't take steps now to fix what that dry run was. Any of you guys take a look at that thing?
Well, Eric, let me say this. The insurrection on January 6th did not start on January 6th.
Correct.
That insurrection has been building for 30 years. And it was financed by major sources in the Republican Party. They targeted state legislatures so they could control voting. And then they succeeded with appointments to the Supreme Court to throw out federal oversight about voting rights.
The voting rights law, yes. The key sections of the voting rights law. Mm-hmm.
This has been building for a long time, and it's very frightening. What the general said, and I thought was interesting, is that there are insurrectionary forces in the police departments in the United States. There are insurrectionary forces in the military. And what these retired generals said is that to protect democracy in 2024, the military has got to identify and root out these forces. Otherwise, we're going to have a very divided military, a very threatening situation. One of the things they pointed to, Joe Biden, President Biden, said that all troops have to be vaccinated. Well, in Oklahoma, the National Guard refused to implement an order from the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief.
The commander of the Oklahoma National Guard said, he's not my commander-in-chief because we're not activated. My governor is my commander-in-chief and I'm following his lead. I'm not going to follow that mandate. Right.
Yeah, that sounds like the Confederacy in 1861, where Confederate units, Southern units of the United States Army said, no, we're obeying the order of our governor. We're not obeying the order of a president who we do not accept.
That was a perfect example of what the generals say we're going to be faced with if we don't deal with taking steps to make sure that this does not unfold the same way in 2024 as it did this past year. I agree with what those generals said. I can tell you, there was a time as a regular officer in the United States Air Force, I contemplated having a full military career as a career officer, as all regular officers are supposed to be. And what I do know is there is a distinct drumbeat about chain of command. And that's why the commander-in-chief is your commander-in-chief. And in our system of government, the president of the United States is the commander-in-chief. And so all the orders flow down from there. So if you have a wacko as commander-in-chief and he's giving crazy orders, then the troops down the line have to decide, is this a valid order? Is this not a valid order? Now, if you have two people who are claiming to be commander-in-chief in a disputed election, this was the thrust of the general's op-ed piece, you're going to have divided military who are saying, yeah, this guy is the real commander-in-chief. No, this guy over here is the real commander-in-chief. And you might have a divided military where you might have them taking up arms against each other to settle this problem. And that's why that op-ed piece was seminal and was cogent. And I'm hoping that the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, read that piece and is open to some of the suggestions that those three generals talked about. They need to do actual war game scenarios on what might transpire, how they're going to deal with it, and how are they going to make sure they deal with it within the context of staying under the Constitution of a military that's responsive to a civilian government that's not taking part in a coup. I thought it was a brilliant op-ed.
I did too, Eric. I thought it was well done. And the three people who wrote it are people, you know, you can respect because they're all different levels of generals in the military. What Alan said about the people, the Oklahoma National Guard not accepting an order from the commander-in-chief is deadly scary. Bingo. I mean, it's like, we're not activated, so we don't have to listen to you. And of course, that's bull. That's the worst reading of the law I've ever seen.
That is crazy.
And of course, every order that comes down from the commander-in-chief is not a suggestion. It's an order. And military, you know, you don't question what comes down to you. You know, that's insubordination. That's all sorts of things that can happen to you. That's scary. That's just deadly scary without extending this. But, you know, what Alan said about the Oklahoma guy refusing, that's, you know, that's the beginning of the Confederacy. You're right.
I also don't have confidence in the military right now. One of the things, a recent article in the New York Times exposed that in Afghanistan, drone attacks were killing civilians. And they documented a number of places where this happened, and the military covered it up, denied that it took place. I mean, there's a big mess there that needs to be cleaned up so that we can have confidence in the military again.
That was a major investigation in the Times, correct?
Yeah. Now, yes. That was a very in-depth investigation, and I'm going to agree and then give you what I consider an exception, because that investigation talked about a unit that was actually dealing with these drone attacks, that on certain levels, they were totally non-supervised and out of control and did some seriously bad things. And then when they had good commanders in control, that didn't happen. And then when they had bad commanders in control, it happened again. That's needing to be actually fixed from the root cause on up. Now, the other story that crossed my desk that I looked at and said, you need to look at this really carefully, is the day of the evacuation from Afghanistan. And here's the deal with that one. The chaos on that evacuation was so bad, and things were so, I guess chaotic is the right word, that half the time they didn't know who was where and what was what. And they got intelligence that there was this car bomb that was supposed to be coming to deal with those Americans and those allies of ours that were being evacuated, that was going to be used to try to wipe them out. And based on the intelligence they had, they actually launched a drone strike. And unfortunately, the target that they selected was not the supposed bomber and car bomb and the whole bit. And so they ended up annihilating a bunch of civilians.
Including children.
Yes. And what I'm saying is, horrendous as that was, under the rubrics of what was taking place at the time, I'm not saying those folks who launched that strike needed to be brought up on any kinds of charges, because they launched something against what they thought was a valid target. And so that, as bad as it seems that you kill civilians within that context, you have to deal with the situation as it unfolded. That other investigation about those wackos doing what they did, those people need to be brought up on charges. They need to be totally prosecuted and need to be drummed out of the military. Here's my take on that whole situation.
And we have about 2 minutes.
Oh God, we ran out of time dealing with all this other stuff. We're gonna, look, CRT, schools being under fire. Alan, that's your bailiwick. Give us a quick summary of what we got to look for next year.
Okay, all across the nation, the Republican Party is rallying on its grassroots for the 2022 election, for the 2024 election. And it's created this big bugaboo, this monster that it's fighting against, CRT. Now, CRT isn't taught anywhere in any school in the United States. No one has been able to document the teaching of CRT.
Right.
In Great Neck, what they found is that a teacher talked about CRT, but not to preach it, but to evaluate it.
Mm-hmm.
But what they do is they cherry pick material as, this is being done.
Yeah.
In Texas, in Florida, they've outlawed the teaching of CRT, and supposedly teachers in districts will be brought up on charges.
Right. That's a law that DeSantis is trying to pass. We got to really revisit this. That's going to be one of our early things in 2022.
Now, I put together a rap.
Time?
Wrap
it up with a rap.
Okay, and because we said with a rap. And Diga Duncan Zim Fry was a song of anti-Nazi resistance in the 1930s. So I adjusted it. And it goes, Diga Duncan Zim Fry, my thoughts freely flower. Diga Duncan Zim Fry, my thoughts give me power. Texas can't map them. Florida can't trap them. No man can deny Diga Duncan Zim Fry.
And with that, we're about out, Eric.
Okay, folks. Catch you the next time. This has been Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch us on Twitter and YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And I'm Alan Singer, the guest and friend. Thank you for having me. Merry Christmas to all, social justice to all, and to all a good night.
Happy New Year.